What if punishment wasn't about ending a life, but owning it? What if your body itself became a monument of warning, sculpted in pain to terrify every woman who dared to step out of line? Imagine this. Beneath the cold belly of a medieval fortress, far below the reach of sunlight, lies a chamber swallowed by centuries of silence. The walls sweat with damp earth, and the air hums with the ghosts of suffering. Against the stone, lit only by the shiver of a dying flame, stands a creation so haunting it borders on art. From a distance, you might mistake it for armor, beautifully curved, gleaming faintly under the torchlight, crafted with the same meticulous care given to a knight's breastplate. But take one step closer and you'll see the truth. This was never made to defend. It was built to dominate. Every curve of iron follows the shape of a woman's body, every rivet and line designed not for protection, but humiliation. It wasn't created to spill blood quickly, but to draw it slowly. This was cruelty engineered into elegance, pain turned into spectacle, suffering transformed into a sermon. This was how fear was taught, not through words, but through the screams that echoed down those stone halls. These instruments of terror weren't tools of justice. They were theater, grim performances meant to remind every woman watching that silence was salvation and obedience was survival. But who dreamed up such horrors? Who sanctified this machinery of torment? To uncover that, we must descend deeper, into a Europe ruled not by reason, but by faith twisted into control. In medieval Europe, hierarchy wasn't just law, it was divine decree. The church preached that woman was man's temptation, his test, his eternal burden. Her flesh was branded with the sin of Eve, her mind seen as dangerous curiosity. The message was relentless. If she could tempt, she must be contained. If she could speak, she must be silenced. And so, from pulpit to courtroom, that belief was hammered into policy. Women lived under a shadow older than law itself. Their bodies were battlegrounds, their will a threat. Disobedience, real or imagined, invited punishment so creative it bordered on ritual. The woman who spoke too freely, who refused a marriage, who merely offended a man with her presence, all could be judged guilty without trial. Her body became the courtroom, the sentence, and the evidence all at once. And out of this warped sense of justice came the first of many horrors, the breast ripper. At first glance, it looked crude, a set of iron claws curved like a beast's talons, fixed to a handle. But its simplicity made it monstrous. Heated until it glowed red, the claws were pressed against the flesh and then ripped away. Skin, muscle, bone, shredded in an instant. It wasn't a method of execution, it was a declaration. Witnesses gathered in markets and town squares, their faces pale in the firelight as the condemned woman's screams turned into sermons of obedience. Her agony was a public warning. This is what happens when a woman disobeys. Records from the 14th century Germany describe one such case, a woman accused of poisoning her husband. Her punishment, her breasts torn from her body before she was hanged. But this wasn't random cruelty. Manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum, the infamous witch-hunting guide, explicitly told inquisitors to target women where they have sinned most. The breast, symbol of nurture, of creation, became the site of annihilation. To destroy it was to destroy the very essence of womanhood, the ability to give life, to feed, to comfort. It was the desecration of creation itself, a statement that even life could be weaponized against its giver. And yet, as Europe's hunger for control deepened, pain alone wasn't enough. The next evolution of torment would go deeper, where no one could see, but the victim could never forget. When cruelty learns to whisper instead of scream, it becomes even more terrifying. Enter the Pair of Anguish, a device so deceptively elegant it could almost be mistaken for jewelry. Small, metallic, smooth, shaped like a delicate pear. But inside that beauty lurked unimaginable suffering. At rest, it looked harmless, but once inserted into the body, into the mouth, the womb, or other orifices, the torturer would twist a screw, and the pear would bloom open. Its metal petals would expand outward, tearing flesh, rupturing tissue, widening the wound with each slow, deliberate turn. It was silent, efficient, invisible, a device not of execution, but of domination. It was never used on thieves or soldiers or spies. No, it was reserved for women. Women accused of blasphemy, of lust, of abortion, of speaking truths no man wanted to hear. Imagine it, the flicker of candlelight, the priest's expression carved in stone, the soft, sickening grind of metal as the crank turns. No witnesses, no mercy, only the slow bloom of agony. For many, death did not come, but survival was no mercy either. They lived, disfigured, broken, silenced. The pear didn't just destroy the body, it desecrated the idea of womanhood itself. The womb, the mouth, the voice, each targeted because they represented creation, communication, independence. The message was unmistakable. To silence the voice was to silence the soul. But not every punishment left blood on the floor. Some were designed to linger, to consume from the inside out, turning existence itself into endurance. That was the genius, if one can call it that, of the iron corset. From a distance, it could be mistaken for something regal. Plates of iron shaped to a woman's torso, polished to a dull shine, glinting like armor. But look closer, and you'll see its true nature. This was not armor. It was a prison. A cage molded to the female body, locked tight around the ribs and waist. Some versions were lined with spikes that pricked the skin with every breath. Others were designed to compress slowly over time, crushing ribs, restricting lungs, collapsing posture. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to reshape, to teach obedience one breath at a time. Women were forced to live in them for days, weeks, even months, cooking, cleaning, sleeping, all while encased in steel. Every movement a punishment, every breath a negotiation with pain. Bruises blossomed beneath the metal. Flesh broke, bones bent. But the true goal wasn't physical destruction. It was spiritual defeat. In France, girls were made to wear them as moral correction. In Germany, husbands ordered them for wives deemed disobedient. There was no trial, no appeal, only silence and steel. And the most haunting part? The corset wasn't hidden in dungeons. It was paraded through daylight. It lived among neighbors, in homes, at markets. Women wore their submission in public, their suffering mistaken for modesty. It was torture disguised as virtue. The corset twisted femininity into punishment. What was once celebrated as grace and beauty became bondage and pain. The body itself, the source of life, was turned into a battlefield. But for those who still refused to stay silent, who dared to speak too loudly, the final invention waited. A device that attacked the very thing men feared most, a woman's voice. It was called the Scold's Bridle. Imagine a mask of iron shaped like a cage for the head. Straps locked around the skull, pressing into the cheeks, the chin, the jaw. Inside the mouth, a sharpened spike that pierced the tongue whenever the victim tried to speak. She wasn't killed, she was erased. Women were paraded through town squares, bells attached to the bridle, so that every movement rang out her humiliation.
Children laughed, men jeered, neighbors turned away. Her crime? Speaking too freely, arguing, complaining, gossiping, or sometimes merely existing too long.
The Iron Maiden. Even the name sends a chill down the spine, doesn't it? It conjures the image of a towering sarcophagus, cold, unyielding, lined with spikes that close around a living body like the jaws of hell itself. A mechanical death, a slow, cruel embrace. For centuries, it's been portrayed as the ultimate symbol of medieval sadism. Artists painted it, writers described it in morbid detail, museums displayed it as the crown jewel of Europe's dark past. But what if I told you it was all a lie? That this infamous device, the Iron Maiden of Nuremberg, the Virgin of Agony, never existed in the Middle Ages at all. Historians digging through the archives found something astonishing. There were no records, no court documents, no witness accounts, no sketches or mentions from the time when Europe's dungeons were busiest. Nothing. The first Iron Maiden appeared not in the 14th century, but the 18th century. Not in a torture chamber, but in a museum. It was a prop, a carefully crafted invention designed to horrify and fascinate the public. Built from bits and pieces of older devices, displayed to thrill visitors and feed their dark curiosity. A gruesome spectacle sold as history. And people believed it. They wanted to believe it because it fit perfectly with the image of the barbaric Middle Ages that later generations loved to condemn. The Iron Maiden became a convenient monster, a metaphor for everything we wanted to call primitive, uncivilized, other. But here's the paradox. The fact that it wasn't real doesn't make it any less horrifying. Because while the Iron Maiden was a myth, the suffering it represented was all too real. The tortures women endured didn't need spikes or sarcophagi to destroy them. Society itself was the Iron Maiden. The walls were not made of iron, they were made of fear, of religion, of law, of expectation. Every commandment, every sermon, every whispered warning forged another nail in the coffin of freedom. And perhaps that's why the legend endured. Because the Iron Maiden wasn't born in the dungeon. It was born in the imagination. It was a mirror, reflecting how violence against women had become both fetishized and normalized. Artists began depicting it with eerie sensuality, a woman-shaped coffin, curved and graceful, her body lined with spikes that promised both pain and pleasure. The torture became eroticized, the victim aestheticized. It wasn't just about cruelty anymore, it was about spectacle. The idea that female suffering could be turned into entertainment, into beauty, into a symbol wasn't new, but the Iron Maiden made it literal. And that, perhaps, is the most haunting truth of all. Because while the Iron Maiden itself may have been fantasy, the fascination with women's pain was, and still is, terrifyingly real. Think about it. We put these objects behind glass. We point at them. We whisper their stories as though they belong to another age. But do they really? Or have they simply changed form? The world no longer straps women into iron cages or clamps their tongues with spikes, but control has learned to disguise itself. Today, the weapons look different. Expectation, shame, beauty standards, silence. The methods are modern, but the purpose remains ancient. To restrain, to remind, to make women live within boundaries drawn by someone else. The Iron Maiden didn't vanish. She evolved. And the more we understand her myth, the more we uncover the truth it was hiding. Because in the end, the real horror wasn't the spikes or the coffin. It was the idea that pain could be turned into morality, that suffering could be sanctified. And that's not just medieval history. That's the blueprint of patriarchy. If history teaches us anything, it's that cruelty often hides behind the mask of virtue. Every instrument of pain, the breast ripper, the pair of anguish, the iron corset, the Scold's bridle, was justified by the same words: morality, order, obedience. They weren't called torture devices.
They were called corrections. But make no mistake, these were not punishments for crimes. They were punishments for identity, for existing as a woman in a world that feared what she represented. Each spike, each strap, each screw was an attempt to control something intangible: freedom, thought, voice. The breast ripper mutilated the body that gave life. The pear desecrated the womb that could create it. The corset crushed the breath of rebellion. The bridle silenced the voice that dared to question. And behind every invention stood the same idea, that a woman's power was a threat that had to be broken. The church blessed it, the courts enforced it, the people watched it, and the silence of the centuries became the loudest confession of all. Because history didn't just destroy women, it erased them. For every recorded punishment, there are thousands of manes lost, forgotten, buried in unmarked graves, or burned at stakes whose ashes the wind carried away. But the echoes remain. You can hear them in the myths that linger, in the Iron Maiden, the witches, the whispers of sinful women whose stories were rewritten by those who feared them most. And you can see them in the ways our modern world still polices women's bodies, voices, and choices. Different tools, same logic. Because control never disappears. It adapts. We live in a time that prides itself on progress, yet the remnants of those iron instruments still cling to our collective psyche. They live in beauty standards that demand pain in the name of perfection, in laws that still debate the ownership of a woman's body, in systems that still reward silence over defiance. The past never really leaves us, it just learns to hide in plain sight. So when we look at these relics in glass cases, when we whisper their names in documentaries or online threads, we aren't just studying history, we're confronting the architecture of oppression that built our present. Because remembering isn't about shock value, it's about accountability. It's about honoring the women whose screams were turned into silence, whose bodies were transformed into lessons, whose stories were twisted into myths. They deserve more than to be museum curiosities. They deserve to be remembered as what they truly were, victims of a system that feared their strength, yet could never completely extinguish it. Even through the horror, even through the humiliation, some endured, some resisted, some whispered truths that outlived their tormentors. And that's the quiet power history never managed to crush. Because pain, no matter how sanctified, cannot erase the human will to be heard. Every time we uncover one of these stories, every time we name these instruments for what they were, we strip power from the silence that once protected them. The breast stripper, the pear, the corset, the bridle, the Iron Maiden, they all share a single origin: fear. The fear of a woman who could think, choose, and speak for herself. But here's the truth that those centuries of cruelty failed to kill. You can case the body, but never the idea. And that idea of freedom, of equality, of voice has outlived every iron chain ever forged. So when we remember these tools, we don't do it for morbid fascination. We do it as an act of defiance, as a promise that their pain will not be forgotten and their silence will not be repeated. Because forgetting them means forgiving the system that created them. And remembering, that's the first step toward breaking it forever. So the next time you see a relic behind glass cases or hear a whisper about the Iron Maiden, don't just see metal and myth. See the centuries of resistance buried beneath it. See the women whose stories refuse to stay silent. Because the true weapon isn't iron, it's memory. And remembering, that's